Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 91 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and Mike Koomar is with me. And tonight, Mike and I are going what was a pretty awesome rivalry weekend. We had some surprises, some upsets, some better teams taking care of business. And, Mike, before we get into the games, what a crazy weekend of college hoops. And this was, at least to my knowledge, the most fun I had watching games that I had no interest in a while.
Yeah, definitely the best weekend of games we've had this entire season. You've always got one to two really, really good weekends where you got a lot of upsets, a lot of rivalry games, and we had it all. We had homecomings, we had the best rivalries in the sport, we had some bizarre endings, we had the pandemonium in one of the better conferences in college basketball. We had a little bit of everything this weekend, Sean, and I don't think any of the games that were headlined really disappointed. Maybe except for one rivalry game that wasn't so close, but with the exception of that, this Saturday was phenomenal.
And as the calendar turned to February, Mike, I think it really set in that like March Madness is coming and
Yeah,
conference tournament week for that matter before March Madness is coming, and there's still some of these teams have half their conference slate left, so we're not saying like it's ending soon or anything like that, but maybe the light at the end of the tunnel is just appearing. Let's start in the ACC, Mike. A couple of notable games here. The league really is a down year for the ACC, but two games I want to talk about from the Atlantic Coastal Conference. We're going to start with what many consider to be the best rivalry in the sport, and it was, as you previewed earlier, Mike, probably the only one that didn't really live up to the billing. Duke takes down North Carolina 87-70. That scoreline was fairly optimistic for Carolina. They actually won the second half. But, Mike, Duke is one of the best teams in the country on their home floor. They took care of business over a North Carolina team that at this point is on the wrong side of the bubble. But not much surprises here.
no, not much surprising. I think we saw it coming. I don't know if I expected Duke to be so far ahead so quick in this game. I mean, it was never even close, and albeit it was only a 17-point victory for Duke, it was a this felt like this game could have been a 30 to 40 point game for a little bit until some of the scrubs got some extra time in. Cooper Flag, as expected, he looked amazing again. 21 points, 8 boards, and 7 assists. Duke just looks really good. And Auburn right now is definitely the best team in the country. But Duke clearly looks like a team that can compete for national championship this year. This is about as good of a chance as they've had in perhaps a decade, Sean. So really excitement around Durham right now.
Yeah, Duke is pretty clearly the number two team to me. I know they did beat Auburn, but that was at Cameron on their home floor, and it's Auburn's only loss. And the question for the rest of the year for Duke, Mike, is are they going to be challenged? Like there's a very good chance that they win the rest of their games through the ACC tournament. I mean, you have to think that that's a possibility at this point.
It's a strong possibility. There's always going to be a couple games that are going to trip them up. When you're looking at their schedule, a couple of road games really, come out to me. One is next Saturday. They're going to go on the road to Clemson, probably one of the three teams that you feel comfortable about being in the tournament right now. Clemson 10-1 in the conference, 18-4. They've got a signature out of conference win earlier in the season against Kentucky. But then they've also, Duke has an out of conference slate against the Illinois Fighting Illini later in February. It's kind of a weird one.
Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, at the Garden. Weird to have one of your last games of the regular season be an out of conference, but perhaps a preview for the tournament. Those are the two games that I look at, and I think, maybe Duke has a chance to lose those games. Carolina in Chapel Hill is always going to be a tough one as well. But when you look at this schedule, they don't play very many teams that are even above 500 at this point. So I think, with the exception of those three games, it should be pretty smooth sailing for Duke.
Yeah, of the three other tournament teams at this point, they don't play Pitt. They don't play Louisville, and they have Clemson on the road. That's one game against tournament team, or two games against tournament teams the rest of the way, with counting that Illinois game. And then at the point where they go to Chapel Hill, Mike, the way that this thing is going for North Carolina, they're not a tournament team at this point, and you have to think like what's the state of that program going to be when that game comes around? UNC has not really taken care of business over some subpar ACC teams, and right now at 13-10, they're on the outside looking in.
Yeah, and to be able to be on the inside of the field of 68, it's going to take a lot.
Well, they have to win the
I
next
don't.
two games first. Two games against two tournament teams, Pitt at home, Clemson on the road. They have to win those two because, Mike, that Duke game on the final day is their only other game against a tournament team.
They've got no wiggle room at all. And you look at their schedule, who have they beat? Dayton in an early game in Maui. That was a good one. But other than that, Sean, UCLA and nothing else. No tournament teams have they beat so far. So, yeah, I think both Pitt and Clemson are must-win games for the Tar Heels. The rest of the season, they don't have a very hard schedule, but they've also lost a lot of games to not very good teams. So, I think they probably have to win of their last 9 games this season. They probably got to win 7 or 8 of them to even have a chance, unless they win the ACC tournament.
Yeah, they have to. They don't have a good record and they don't have good wins. It doesn't
Yeah.
really look like the good wins thing is going to change at this point unless they are to get Duke and Pitt and Clemson. And they have to get hot quick because again, it's not the worst year to have to win the ACC tournament to make it, but the team last year won the ACC tournament and they had to make it, and obviously they went all the way to the Final Four in NC State, but things are not looking good for Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels. All right, Mike,
Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
They've got 5 teams left on their schedule that have a losing record right now. So, while you expect them to win those games, it doesn't really boost your tournament resume and make you look like a tournament team. So they're going to win some games coming down the stretch, but already 10 losses in a pretty weak conference and not playing a crazy out-of-conference schedule. So, yeah, worried about Duke.
Yeah, they're 40th in KenPom, so it's not horrible, but that is the place where you could risk being left out if you don't have enough victories. And obviously if they lose a bunch of games, that'll go down and it won't be a question, and this next week is huge for them. If they win these 2 games, they're 15-10 with 3 good wins instead of 1. Well, maybe a different story next time around. All right, Mike, the other game in the ACC that we want to talk about is Pitt on the road at Wake Forest. Pitt, one of the last teams in the field. Wake, one of the first teams out of the field, and it's Steve Forbes and the Demon Deacons that get a 2-point victory. Wake Forest improves to 16-6. Pitt falls to 14-7. This seemed like, Mike, that it might come into serious consideration as a head-to-head tiebreaker between these teams later. This is their only meeting of the year, and Wake Forest had to win. They were at home needing the win to stay in the tournament field. They didn't beat Duke and Louisville last time out, but at least for now, Wake Forest has given themselves a shot to make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, this game was a thrilling game to watch. I know this probably wasn't the headline of a lot of people's calendars, but early tip, and it did not disappoint. Look, came down to the wire. Wake Forest able to eke out a win, courtesy of some really good play from Cameron Hildreth, who had 24 points in this game, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, led the way for the Demon Deacons. They had a down year last year, but look, they're got a good chance to make the tournament again this year, and I think there's got to be a lot of excitement around the program. You look at what's next for them. You also don't see a particularly tough schedule. They've got Duke as one of their last games of the season, but aside from that, you look at Georgia Tech might be their best team the rest of the way. Probably SMU, but it's going to be a pretty easy schedule for them, so they needed to get a win against a quality opponent to strengthen their chances of making the tournament.
Yeah, it seems like Wake Forest are finding themselves in this spot like a lot in the recent years.
Yeah.
Bubble team where if one game goes their way, they're probably in. Well, in the past, that one game hasn't gone their way, and it looks like if they can go out to California and they play Stanford and Cal up next, if they're able to get those 2 games, well, maybe this might just be their year to make the dance. But in terms of Pitt, Mike, they're starting to lose a couple more games than they probably should at 14-7. Again, they lost to Duke, Louisville, and Clemson in the league. They still have not lost to a non-tournament team. Their non-conference losses are at Mississippi State and Wisconsin. They beat Ohio State on the road. So despite being 14-7 in a bad ACC, Pitt's resume is still in a decent spot.
Yeah, they're going to have a couple opportunities. That North Carolina game is really going to be, I feel like, a desperation game for both squads. If Pitt loses that game, you got to feel like they're going to be in a little bit of trouble. With that being said, they do get a really good opportunity to get a big win in March when they travel to Louisville to take on the Cardinals. By the way, we got to talk a little bit about Louisville, Sean, how impressive they've been this year to be able to be competitive despite losing a lot of players due to injury. Yeah, they did lose a shocking upset this weekend, but regardless, Wake Forest will have a good chance to get a win there. But that's really about it. It's slim pickings in the ACC right now. Sean, I'm gonna be honest. I don't know if we're gonna see more than 3 teams make it. We might see a fourth, but depending how Pitt, North Carolina, and Wake Forest finish out their seasons, it could just be 3 teams.
It looks like there is only room for 4. If North Carolina or SMU or Wake play their way in, that's probably at the expense of Pitt. But Louisville, Clemson, and Duke are pretty close to locks at this point, barring like a 2 or 3 game losing streak. But Louisville, Pat Kelsey's definitely the coach of the year in the ACC for now, as you mentioned with their injuries, Mike. And they've already beaten a lot of good teams in the ACC. They beat North Carolina. They beat Clemson. They won at Pitt. They won at SMU by 25. They beat Wake at home. And they did stub their toe, unfortunately, against Georgia Tech. But they're still in a really good spot resume-wise. They did pretty well at the Battle for Atlantis. And they seem like they're just going to be stacking up wins. Just one game against a tournament team left that's home against Pitt. They should be favored in every one of their games remaining, and hopefully for them that they can start stacking W's because they're 16-6 right now. They could have a great record going into the tournament.
Yeah. Great record. Maybe not as good of a seed, but they could rack up some wins and have an impressive season.
All right, Mike, that's it for the ACC, really. Again, the middle and the bottom of this league is really bad, and our conversations are going to be limited to the top 4 or 5 until something changes. All right, down the list we go. Let's go to the Big East, an important weekend in the league. We had 2 really big games yesterday, Mike, that we're going to talk about. First off, let's go to Milwaukee and UConn and Dan Hurley. Couple of bad games in a row. They go on the road and beat Marquette, the best available win in conference play, away at the best team. And despite with Noel out, McNeely out, the Huskies get the job done here, and it was pretty much wire to wire. They only end up winning by 8, but they were winning and in control of this game from minute 1 to minute 40. And Mike, every time we think we can count out UConn, oh, they're just not that good this year, they show up and surprise us.
Yeah, I think this is the signature win of Big East Conference play in the entire conference this season. You look at how dominant UConn was. It was wire to wire, and it was never really close, like you said, Sean. I think the closest the game got really was in the last 2 minutes of this game. Marquette did make it a 6-point game, but UConn was able to shut the door pretty quickly on them. Really, really impressive stuff from Hurley's squad, especially having a few players that are going to be out. Expect to see McNeely back against St. John's on Friday. That's going to be a huge game for both Pitino's squad and for Hurley's team. So really impressive stuff out of UConn to get the win in a pretty tough place to play.
And for Marquette, they're still 18-4, still in a great spot to get a protected seed. Again, the depth is a little bit of an issue there, but Cam Jones is probably the Big East Player of the Year. And, Mike, as long as they bounce back, they also go to Madison Square Garden next. So hell of a week for the Red Storm. Then they go to Creighton away. So Marquette's got 2 really good chances to bounce back here and add another win to their already impressive resume.
Yeah, and how about for UConn, Alex Caravan in this game? He was tasked with playing 40 minutes of basketball for Dan Hurley. Did not sit in this game. 15 points in this one, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, going up against some really good big talent for Marquette. So really an outstanding job by him to lead his Huskies to a huge victory. You look at some other really good play. Solo Ball had 25 points in this one, the sophomore from Virginia. So I think look, UConn could be one of these teams. They've had injuries this year. They've had to play with some missing players. If you can get all those guys back and healthy for March, it could be dangerous because some of these guys have had more experience playing minutes that they don't typically play. So I could be excited for UConn coming down the stretch. We'll see how this week goes. As we said, they've got St. John's on Friday, and then next Tuesday they've got Creighton on the road. So big week for them.
Well, one last interesting tidbit from this game, Mike, is that UConn lost the turnover battle 25-8 and never looked like losing the game. That
25 turnovers.
It was the first time ever that a team has been minus 17 or worse in a turnover margin and won since they started keeping track of that. But yeah, you're not going to see that again, probably. Obviously, UConn had 42 attempts to Marquette's 63, and the free throws were 19-22, so it was pretty close. Not many teams are going to win with that fewer shot attempts, but again, 60% from the field and 12 3-pointers, that'll do it there. But again, you probably won't see that again.
No, not at all. That was pretty shocking disparity. It seemed like UConn was either making a shot or turning the ball over in every single possession in this game. But they played audience to what was a crazy Saturday, and this was certainly a game that we did not expect to go UConn's way.
All right, the other important game in the Big East was Creighton going on the road to Villanova, a team trying to play themselves back into the bubble. Creighton trying to play themselves away from it, and it's the Blue Jays that get the win, 62-60. Some controversy late. Villanova was winning by one. Creighton got a timeout when it was pretty clear that he had landed out of bounds before. And then the Blue Jays take advantage of that opportunity with Stephen Ashworth banking in a corner three with 6 or 7 seconds left, and Creighton gets out of Philadelphia with the win. But, Mike, it doesn't seem like it's really happening for Villanova this year, and Creighton's able to get what will turn out to be a good win on the resume.
Yeah, probably the worst made go-ahead basket I've ever seen in a college basketball game. Stephen Ashworth, it's not that he banked in a three. He banked in a corner three. I didn't even know that was possible. So he missed it so bad that it went in. So I guess good for him, whatever. Creighton got lucky to get out of Philadelphia with the victory. Very, very, very lucky. And you look on the other side, Villanova, they played well enough to win this game. They come up just short, and that's 3 straight losses for the Wildcats. And what for a second looked like they had a good chance. They had a good thing going after that win against UConn. They've now lost 5 of 6, so they're in a lot of trouble. You look on the other side, you look at Creighton. This is a team that, look, I don't think they're going to be back in the rankings next week. You never know, but they're going to have a lot more opportunities to get some big wins. They've got Marquette, Creighton, and St. John's all coming up in their next 4 games. So they've got Providence and what used to be called the Dunkin' Donuts Arena. I know it's not anymore, but that'll also be a good test for them, even though Providence is not having their best season. Creighton's got a lot of opportunities. They got really lucky here, but sometimes a little luck is all you need to get into a good position for the NCAA tournament.
And they had a really tough non-con with a ton of injuries, and
yeah,
if they put themselves in a good enough spot, the committee has over the years looked at the conditions of every game. If they win some of these games, finish near the top of the Big East, which they are 9-2 right now, just 1 game behind St. John's. If they're to win this league and get a bunch of other wins against the teams near the top, they could fire up the seed lines. I have them at 9 right now, but they're winning games at a good rate. Pop Isaacs is out for the season, but Kalkbrenner's healthy, Ashworth is healthy. They don't have a ton of depth, but again, if you win enough games for the committee to notice you as a good team, especially at the end of the year, those early season woes could be excused for maybe a bump in the seed line.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I would say is in the Big East, there are not a ton of tournament teams in the Big East this year, but there's a lot of quality opponents. And what I mean by that is you go down the list and maybe the bottom 3 teams they're pretty bad. Butler, Seton Hall, DePaul. None of those are particularly good teams. But then you go from there, and Everybody else has at least 5 wins in the conference. Providence could very easily be, 7-4, 8-3 in the conference. Chance to fight for a tournament bid, as does Georgetown. So the Big East, you've got a lot of good chances to get good wins for any of these bubble teams.
And the 4 teams in the middle of the pack that you mentioned there, Mike, they're all in a good enough spot where a road win would be a quad 1 win, which is important.
Yeah.
So 8 road games, assuming you are one of the top 8 teams, 7 road games would be quad 1 opportunities, and then the top 4 teams at home would also be quad 1. So the league might not look as good as it has over the years, but I'm not totally ruling out one of those 4 in the middle of the pack winning a bunch of games and making the tournament, because Georgetown is better than their record, Xavier is better than their record, and so is Villanova and Providence. And it might be too much of a job for Nova or Providence to get in, but Xavier at 13-9, they have a couple good wins, and then Georgetown at 14-8 too have a couple of good wins. So the Big East is not in as bad of a spot as we thought it might be a couple of weeks ago. And again, that'll be another really interesting conference tournament, because you got 3 distinct tiers. The 4 teams that are really good. You got the 4 teams in the middle of the pack who can beat any of the top teams when they play them at home. And then the bottom of the 3 where you really have to beat them or you're really missing out. So.
Yeah, you got to win those bottom 3 against the bottom 3 teams. If not, that's a huge black eye on your tournament chances for that middle tier. But like you said, Sean, clearly there is 3 tiers in this conference this year.
All right, Michael, that's it for the Big East. Let's go over to the Big 12. What a disaster in the most positive way possible this weekend from this league. Some upsets, some road teams winning. Actually, mostly road teams winning. If you look at it, you had some crazy comebacks from home teams. Let's start off with the most surprising result of them all. That's Jerome Tang and the Kansas State Wildcats going into Hilton Coliseum at Iowa State and winning by 19. Not sure anybody thought this was going to be a close game, but they expected it to go the other way. Iowa State was 15-point favorites in this one, and they totally lay an egg, and Kansas State finally plays a game to their potential. But, Mike, with all the crazy results this weekend, this one was the most surprising to me.
Yes, this one was absolutely stunning, Sean, especially when you look at their trajectory of Kansas State versus Iowa State seasons. Iowa State looking to grab a 1 seed for what might be the first time ever. They had a terrible week this week. First off, the Caleb Love 3/4 court buzzer beater to send that game to overtime. Then Arizona defeated Iowa State. Then to come home in a rivalry game and snap a 29-game home winning streak to your rivals who are having a really bad year. This was a shocking result, Sean, especially when you look at the manner in it happened. This game was not close in the second half. Yeah, it was a tight game going into the second half. Kansas State went on an early run. They got up to a 19-point advantage. Iowa State, they fought back. They got it within 6, but then Kansas State shut the door right in their face. And this was a signature win for Coach Tang. Might be one of the signature wins of his tenure there, aside from getting to the Elite Eight a couple years ago. And their starting lineup finally came together. Coleman Hawkins had 17. Doug McDaniel had 17. Brennan Hawson had 15. This was a group of guys that you had a lot more expectations of going into this year, and they really laid an egg this entire season. Until now, the clock gets to February. Who knows? Maybe we've got a different Kansas State team coming the rest of the season. They've now won 3 straight games after losing tight ones to Kansas State and then to Baylor. So maybe there's something in the water for Kansas State. They can turn it around their season. They got to go on the road to Arizona State this week. But, Sean, this was a shocking result. And for Iowa State, their stock plummeted this week.
Yeah, and you have to think. Now, I haven't done a bracketology since Friday, but with how many good teams are winning in the SEC, you might think that Iowa State might drop off that one line next time around.
They've got to.
Which, for me, will be in the middle of the week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday, but didn't see this one coming. And there's another one of these type of games, Mike, in another conference that we'll get to later, really expensive roster of transfers, really having a terrible year, and totally surprising everybody and
Yeah.
really dominating their opponents this weekend. We'll see if this continues. I'm leaning towards no. They've been crazy inconsistent this year, even in the course of a 40-minute game. But got to be happy for them because it has been a tough season for the Wildcats. All right, up next, Mike. Again, another surprise. Texas Tech goes on the road in overtime and beats Houston. That won't even begin to describe what happens here. We had an incident really before the first media timeout where Texas Tech leading scorer JT Toppin throws a pass, kicks out a little bit, strikes the Houston player in the groin area, and he's ejected for that. And the rule is very ambiguous. It says you can't guess intent, but there has to be like a deliberate motion. Again, we can argue about that for a while. But not only does that happen, Grant McCaslin gets ejected for defending his player. And you have to think at that point, Mike, all right, you kind of just write it off. Tough game on the road. Your best player gets ejected right away. But no, they battle, they come together, and they win this game on the road at the Fertitta Center. You have to give the Red Raiders a lot of credit for winning under the circumstances.
First off, and I say this as a guy that really does not like Texas Tech, you got to have a lot of credit to the coaching staff and to those players to be able to really muster the courage and play pretty much an entire game and an overtime period on the road at a really tough place to play against a really hot team in the conference and get a win. This is a team that I think come Monday will be in the top 15 in the country, and they absolutely deserve it. When you look at that play, it is absolutely ridiculous that JT Toppin was called an ejection for that play. You can clearly see there was no intent to hit the Texas Tech player in the nether regions. He was just trying to throw a cross-court pass. Players were in his face. He had to try to get some separation. There was clearly no intent there. I could understand a flagrant one. No way that guy should be ejected. But the incredible character that Texas Tech had to be able to step up and win this game is stunning. And you look at some of those players that really stepped up. Chance McMillan in this game played in 43 minutes, and he had 23 points in this game.
It's 43 minutes against Houston, too.
Yeah, against an incredibly athletic and really fit team. Elijah Hawkins also played 42 minutes in this game, Sean. So they were really played with 7 guys the entire game through overtime. So you wonder what kind of shape they'll be in for Tuesday playing a rivalry game against the Baylor Bears. But, man, this was really impressive stuff for the Raiders. And I think this will be a signature win in the Big 12 this entire season. So impressive.
And analytically, Mike, Texas Tech had been really highly ranked all year. They were as high as like 12th in KenPom without being in the top 25. Now, they did get in to get to 22. And then after this win, they go all the way up to 9th in the country. Yeah. So the computers love this Texas Tech team. Again, Houston was 1 in KenPom before this game, and they dropped to number 3. But a quad 1A road win, big time come the tournament, and you have to give them a lot of credit. They were never out of this. They were kind of in control of this game. I don't know if Houston went up by more than 4. Like, this was always going to be a close one. Texas Tech clearly belonged. They didn't. There's nothing fluky about this. Houston won the rebounding by 1. I don't think anybody expected Texas Tech to be down a player to compete in this game, let alone win it. And this will be one that we remember for a while because of these weird circumstances.
Yeah, and I will say, Houston did have a 6-point lead with under 4 minutes to go in this game. Okay, but from watching this game, Sean, it never felt like Texas Tech was out of control of this game. Even when they were down by 6, coming down the stretch, they felt like they had a really good shot to win this game. And like you said, this was not a fluke. And another thing, all right, this season we've seen a lot of controversial calls decided, and we've seen it a couple times on Saturday. We talked about Creighton. We talked about this one. The Big 12's got to get a hand of their officiating crew because the Big 12, I've been saying this for years now, consistently has the worst officials of any conference in college basketball. This was a tragedy that you had the best player for Texas Tech ejected so early, but what a signature way for Texas Tech to get a win. Really impressive stuff.
And there was a very similar call in the Northwestern Michigan game a couple weeks ago, where Northwestern's Jalen Leach was like fouled, and while he was losing his balance, he raised his leg and got flagged golden in that area too. And it was like, you're not gonna eject him for this, are you? And the announcers were like, well, it was a shot to that area, but clearly he's losing his balance. He doesn't mean to do this, so they'll probably just get him for an F1 because you really can't do anything there. But
Yeah,
they ejected him. Now that one was a little different because it was like 3/4 of the way through the game. Northwestern was in control and they ended up losing. But again, It was very, very similar calls. You like to see the consistency, I guess, but there's absolutely no reason for that to be an ejection. And there was just referees have been on the hot seat the last couple weeks, multiple games. Yeah. And you can't say this decided the game, Mike, because Texas Tech still won. But had Houston won by 15, Texas Tech could easily write it off and say, asterisk, this game doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's incredible that 4 minutes into this game, they didn't just do that exact thing, right? It's so easy for them to quit and call this game a wrap in front of a really hostile Houston crowd. But great credit to this team. Clearly a resounding character building win for Texas Tech.
All right, up next, Mike, we got your Baylor Bears, who do take down the Kansas Jayhawks 81-70. Now, that doesn't begin to describe how up and down this game was. 40-21 Kansas at the half. I think it got up to 21. And Baylor comes roaring back with a 60-30 second half for the victory. It is the largest lead that Kansas has ever relinquished and lost the game in program history. And boy, Mike, did your Baylor Bears need it. They get to 14-7 with a Kansas win versus 13-8 without one. That is a huge difference. Baylor needed this one badly. They got themselves back into the game, and they just blew right past them. A lot of times when teams come back from large deficits, they waste all their energy to get back in the game and then kind of lay down. It didn't happen here. Baylor, one of the best second halves of all time, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, this was a stunning second half as ever, especially when you factor in that BJ Edgecombe left the game with about 14 minutes to go in the second half with an injury. That's your best player for the Bears. And not only that, Baylor pretty much played the rest of the game with 5 guys, right? And 5 guys were able to go down and take care of Kansas and really dismantle them in the second half. Jason Asamoah played a couple of minutes for Baylor once Jaden Nunn fouled out, but an incredible, kind of like Texas Tech, a character-building win for the Bears. They really needed it, Sean, and they're still in pretty tough shape injury-wise. Jeremy Roach is still out, and Langston Love is still out. So Baylor's on a deep team. They've only really got 5 guys right now, so you hope they can get at least 1 or 2 of those players ready to play come Tuesday at Texas Tech. But also on the flip side for Kansas, I don't think we've ever seen Kansas choke so hard in a game like this. And look, credit to the Baylor Bears. They played a fantastic game. They stuck in, they hung in there. But, I mean, Kansas completely laid an egg in the second half. It was turnover after turnover, missing really easy shots, a lot of missed layups. This one hurt. And then for the Baylor Bears, one thing they finally did this year was, put it away at the free throw line. The Bears shot 25 of 28 from the free throw line in this game. They got a lot of foul shots in the second half. Shout out Norchad Omier, who's 13 for 14 from the free throw line. If the Bears do what they usually do and miss several more free throws, they might not win this game. But, crazy, crazy game, Sean. I think this is one that the Baylor faithful will remember for a very long time.
And in terms of Baylor first, Mike, going forward for them, I think you just have to win as many games as you can until you get your team healthy and then see if that lines up with the end of the season and maybe you can win a couple games in the tournament. But the faults are their faults. The league is good. They're not in that top tier. But as long as they can stave off getting on the bubble, I think they're in an okay spot until all those players return.
Yeah, if they lost this game, Baylor was in huge trouble, Sean. They're huge trouble missing the tournament, especially when you look at they've got to play at Texas Tech on Tuesday, and then the following Monday they got to go play at Houston. So, and in between that, they play a UCF team that's on the bubble. That's a good UCF team. The rest of the year they've got West Virginia. That's a tournament team. Arizona at home. That's probably a top 20 team. And then it starts to get a little bit easier, but they're going to play a really tough stretch, so they need to get some of these guys back quickly. It looked like both Langston Love and Jeremy Roach were game time decisions for the Bears, so there is a good chance that we get them back Tuesday. Still no update on VJ Edgecombe either. We probably won't learn anything until about an hour before tip off against Texas Tech.
But yeah, you got to win that UCF game, and then you have some home games. You have Colorado and Cincinnati. You have Oklahoma State, TCU, some of the teams near the bottom of this league. I think just take care of business there in your home games and see where that puts you in the Big 10 or Big 12 tournament, and hopefully by then all your players are back. But again, we have seen weirder things happen with teams losing players and then finding a sense of togetherness and getting over the line. And it seems like that may have happened here with Baylor. Nobody else can do anything because they don't have him. So Scott Drew had to leave him out there, regardless of whether they made a mistake or not. And again, this Baylor was trending down, and at least they can stop that for now. Kansas is still a good team. This win will still really age well, and Baylor really needed this one, Mike. And then we'll go to Kansas.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert Wright, he really stood out this entire week, even in the loss to Brigham Young on Tuesday. He was the leading scorer, led the team back, and almost had a comeback victory against Brigham Young. And in this game, the young freshman stood up, had 24 points in this game, and it seemed like you could not stop him in the last 10 minutes of this game, Sean. He's been really impressive. Baylor doesn't want him to be too good the rest of the season because we don't want to lose him to the draft, but he's got a really, really, really good young talent for the Bears in this one. We flipped it over to Kansas, though, and you look at some of these gut-wrenching losses that they've had. Houston, I think they led that game by 4 points or 6 points. 4 points with 20 seconds to go in this game, with 2 shots at the free throw line, and they lose in double overtime in that one. They almost gave the game away to UCF. I know it was a 4-point win, but that's only because they patted on a few free throws inside the last 10 seconds of that game. So that one, they're lucky to survive. You got to get some confidence back. They're going to have a huge game on Monday against Iowa State, 2 teams that are reeling for a victory after a tough week. So that's going to be a big one, Sean, for both squads. They both need a big win.
It's not the time to play Iowa State, I don't think. You don't want to play a desperate team when you're supposed to be the desperate team.
Yeah.
So, again, I just think there's something missing with this Kansas team. Like, they still have an elite coach. They're still pretty good, but the story is starting to be pretty similar to last year. Like, they just don't have a ton of good players. They win games they should. They drop a couple that they really shouldn't. And they end up somewhere in the 13-5, 12-6 in the Big 12, and they're an all right 4 or 5 seed, and they'll probably lose in the round of 32 or the Sweet 16. But again, Bill Self said he was thinking about this year. With a month to go last year, it seems like the same story is being written.
Yeah, it does a little bit. They didn't have the same injuries that they had last year. I feel like Kansas actually had an excuse for their bad play this year. This year, execution-wise, Kansas is doing things that I've never seen the Jayhawks do under the Bill Self era, namely give up a 21-point lead. That's obviously never happened. But you look at the mistakes that they had against Baylor, they looked like an NIT bubble team in the last 10 minutes of this game, not an NCAA tournament top 4 seed. So this one really, really concerned. And also, some guys just didn't play that great. I mean, Hunter Dickinson, yes, I get it. He had 20 points in this game. But if you watch this game, he got dominated by Josh Ojanwuna of Baylor. Not a very good big in the conference. DeJuan Harris had, he had 8 assists in this game. He also gave up the ball a lot. So Yeah, I'm not really feeling very good if I'm a Kansas fan. I feel like I'm going to chalk this season up to another wash pretty soon.
Yeah, and it's just wasn't supposed to be this way. Flory Badunga's a 5-star. You have him learning from Hunter Dickinson, and supposedly will take the reins next year. You have, but there's a bunch of seniors on this team. Adams, Harris, Dickinson will all be gone next year, and you have a couple players. Diggy Coit will be gone next year, so you do have potentially have AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin back. But in the age of the transfer portal, you never know what's coming up next for Kansas. And Bill Self definitely has one of the tougher coaching jobs of his career on his hands right now. They've lost twice at home. They used to never lose at home. And again, as much credit as we can give to Baylor, Mike, if the Kansas teams of old are up by 20, you can chalk that up as a W. And that's now two really bad let-ups from winning positions in a row. And maybe, Iowa State at home, it would be a great bounce back spot, but they're looking for a bounce back too. So I think we may not have found the bottom of the pit for Kansas here.
Yeah, we really haven't. And, it's funny, Sean, for about 15 years there, the Big 12 was Kansas's conference.
Yeah.
No one else won the Big 12. Baylor, even in their golden age, they won a national championship. They won the conference twice. One of those times they shared it with Kansas, and Kansas still felt like they were one of the better teams. But really, since that national championship in 2022, this is not Kansas's conference, and it's not going to get any different, I don't think, in the years coming, especially when you look at the talent from Tech, when you look at the talent as well from Houston. So, yeah, this is a lot of concerns, and I think this turns into a cultural problem. Obviously, don't want to exaggerate here, but you start to wonder how much time Bill Self has at Kansas, because this team in the last couple of years is a shell of what Kansas teams are supposed to be.
All right, we've got a couple more Big 12 games here to go, and then SEC and Big 10 if we have time. But the Arizona rivalry, the state of Arizona rivalry, the old new Big 12 rivalry. We had Tommy Lloyd and his Wildcats going on the road to play Bobby Hurley and the Sun Devils, and it was neck and neck for most of the way here. You have an Arizona team who's in really good shape, and then you have an Arizona State team who was right on the bubble, really could have used this win. But it's the Caleb Love of old, 27 points as Arizona picks up an important quad one road victory, Mike. But then obviously there's some shenanigans after the game, but let's talk about the game first. Impressive road win here from Arizona.
Yeah, first off, I think this was probably the team of the week in college basketball might be the Arizona Wildcats. They get two huge wins and bolster themselves probably into the top 20. We got to start giving them some respect. We thought early on in the season that this was going to be a down year, and right now they're tied for the lead in the Big 12. It shows how impressive Tommy Lloyd has done of a job to be able to turn around this season, and Caleb Love too. 27 points before he got ejected in this game, and also saved the day against Iowa State earlier on in the week. You're starting to think that this Arizona team might have the chance to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. They've got the experience, they've got the talent, and they've got the right coach to do it.
They've always been in good shape computers-wise, even when they were losing a number of games. Most of those were close and really could have gone either way. They're all the way up to 12th in the country per Ken Pum, so if they're looking at a protected seed right now. It doesn't matter what number or if there's a number next to their name. They look really good. We thought that they weren't as good as they're supposed to be early on. Maybe they might just get eaten up in this good Big 12. Well, no, they're beating a lot of solid teams here. Arizona State's a solid team, and they go into their place and they win, and you have to give them a lot of credit. Obviously, the ejections to Love and an Arizona State player, you had no handshakes between the teams after, and then Bobby Hurley in his postgame saying that he will not be voting for Caleb Love for Big 12 Player of the Year. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, the Hurleys have certainly shown themselves to be a little bit childish this year, but this might be take the cake for the shenanigans coming out of the Hurley family. Sean, we're from Jersey, so we're supposed to really like the Hurleys, but this was pretty childish behavior from an adult head coach in college basketball, going to the press conference, slandering Arizona and Caleb Love the entire time. Joke's on him. They got to play Arizona again in a month. They go there to Tucson in March, and so they're going to have another bout, and that could be a really interesting one to watch. Tucson's a really tough place to play in the country, and then you add a little bit of spice to what the end of that game was, and it's going to be a fun one. There could be some extracurricular activity in that game as well, Sean. I could see it.
You have to, like, Hurley's been there for a number of years. You have to think, like, he's a New Jersey guy. He was the Buffalo head coach. He was assistant at Rhode Island when Danny was the coach. You have to think that his name comes up in the offseason pretty much every year and whatever big East Coast job pops up. And you have to think that, like, when is his time at Arizona State going to come up? He's done an all right job. I mean, he's had a couple tournament teams, a couple bad teams. He's done well enough where he probably deserves to keep his job, but he hasn't done great enough that you're like, oh, please stay. Just long term for Arizona State, I'm not sure what he expects to get out of there. They're not going to compete in the Big 12 very often with how many amazing programs are in the league, but it's just it was interesting when they hired him, and it's just kind of been okay.
Yeah, this is his 10th season in Arizona State.
Oh, wow.
I think that's pretty crazy to lose sight of. It feels like it's only been 5 or 6. It's been 10.
Yeah.
He's only had 3 tournament seasons, though. He's never won an NCAA tournament game. So I'll be honest, I don't know how much of an attractive hire he'd be. His total overall record at Arizona State is 166 and 138. Never really did much in the Pac-12. They had one season where they finished second, almost won. But I just don't know how attractive of a hire he is, Sean. And maybe it's the lack of resources that Arizona State pours into their program. I mean, they did have James Harden, and they still did nothing. But, yeah, I just don't know if he's an attractive head coaching hire, especially when you go to a press conference and start acting like a toddler. Like, I just don't know.
And it's not like Caleb Love is a good player, but it's not like he is the runaway Big 12 player of the year or anything. And he's doing that, I'm just going to spite him and not vote for Caleb. Yeah. He wasn't voting for Caleb Love anyway.
It's just childish.
He's probably not even on the first team. And
not right now.
Yeah. So, again, I think it's just an interesting situation to look at long term.
Yeah.
And it looks like Arizona State's going to be right there on the bubble. And there's no way they'll fire him. But if he makes a tournament, they look good at the end of the year, maybe somebody else pulls the trigger. He has been linked with some of these other jobs when they opened. And, he's done okay. He's had 4 20-win seasons at Arizona State out of 10. And, most of those being in the Pac-12, not that impressive. But, again, just an interesting situation that eventually has to come to an end. But,
yeah, I could even see him going outside of the Power 4 conferences to get a job back on the East Coast, back where he's maybe more comfortable. I mean, I don't know how comfortable he is. He's been there for 10 seasons.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
He always comes up in hot seat lists every year. He always comes up as, apparently he had conversations with Providence when Kim English got the job there. He's involved in some of these conversations, and it's just, he was definitely getting fired one season, but then they made the tournament, so they kept him, and just an interesting situation all around.
Very, very interesting.
All right, well, let's go to the SEC, Mike. We've got a ton of games here that we want to talk about. We're going to keep it to the more interesting ones. Let's start in Mississippi. Auburn improves to 20-1 on the year with a 92-82 win over Ole Miss, despite Sean Padula scoring 29. It was a pretty easy win for Auburn. Janai Broome missed a couple of games with an injury. They didn't lose. He comes back, and Mike, he looks like he didn't miss a beat. Still playing 30-plus minutes, 20-12. And Auburn, while he might be the best player in the country, probably the second favorite for the Player of the Year award to Cooper Flagg right now, they're kind of just a juggernaut with or without him, and they're probably the best team in the SEC. But you had to be impressed with Auburn here.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a clear number one team in the country in quite some time, Sean. Auburn is, I no disrespect to Duke. Duke is a great team, but right now it just seems like no one's going to be able to beat Auburn. Look, Ole Miss is a really tough place to play. They've got a really good team. Chris Beard's done a fantastic job there, but Janiyah Bruin was just dominant in this game. He had 20 points, 12 rebounds again. He also had 4 assists to go with that. So really, he might beat Cooper Flag for Player of the Year. I think it's a pretty tight race right now, but that's going to be a really exciting one to watch coming down the stretch. You look at Auburn the rest of the year, and the thing is, they keep winning big games, so it's really tough to look and be like, oh, that's one that's going to trip them up. The SEC is incredibly impressive this year, so they're still going to have tough games. They got Florida. They got to go to Alabama. They also host Alabama at the end of the season. And then they also got to travel to Kentucky. So they've got plenty of games that could trip them up, but nothing seems to be bothering them right now. They are rolling through the SEC. They've had some really tight games. Georgia was a really tight game. Tennessee was a tight game that I felt like that one could have gone either way. But they just seem to be better than every team that they play against.
Yeah, it seems like what it takes to beat them is like a really good home shooting performance. And I guess that's what happened when Duke beat them. They went to Cameron, and Duke was just unstoppable. You have to think, Mike, that Auburn should be favored against anyone, regardless of where they play. There might be a game that they lose out there. Maybe Alabama's slight favorites ahead of them, and that game on February 15th should be a good one. 1-4 right now. But it's really hard to see a team beating this Auburn team by being better. They won't be better. They'll make a couple of fluke shots probably and win, but Auburn is easily the number one overall team, and they're 20-1 on the year, Mike, and they have 13 quad one wins already. It's February 2nd. They played 21 games, 13 quad one wins. Hope we didn't lose you there. Yep.
I got you. It's just crazy how battle-tested this Auburn team is. They still could be the number one team in the country if they had lost 2 of these quad one games, but they're not losing them.
Yeah.
You go back to the start of the season where they had a fight on the airplane,
and then they won.
getting out of the number one overall seed for the rest of the season.
All right, Mike, we got a couple other SEC games here. This one was a rematch of an earlier season bout. This time, Tennessee takes down Florida 64-44. The Gators won the first meeting by 30. This time, it's the Vols by 20. Florida's been an explosive offensive team this year, held to just 24.5% from the field. Tennessee was reeling a little bit coming into this one, Mike, with losses against Auburn and Kentucky. But they take it to Florida, and they show that they still should be taken seriously.
Yeah, this is a team that only played 7 deep due to some significant injuries going into this game to some of their top players. But, I mean, their defense is just dominant. They're, I think, really the only SEC team that you can look at and say they are fantastic defensively. Most of these teams in the SEC are offensive juggernauts. But you look at what Rick Barnes has been able to do defensively, they're an incredibly good team. So look out for Tennessee. I think when you look for projecting who's going to make a run in the NCAA tournament, defensive metrics are huge because it's so easy for a team to have an off night offensively, and like Kentucky last several years, and you're a bad defensive team, you give up some points and your run's over. It's a lot tougher to have a bad defensive night when you're consistently at the top of the country. So I love Tennessee to make a run in the tournament. Long way to say that. But the schedule does not get easier for them either. Coming up, they've got a Missouri team that's clearly been a lot better than advertised going into the year. Kentucky, Vanderbilt, A&M on the road. It doesn't get any easier for them either.
And I would argue that they had an offensive game here, Mike. Just 40% from the field, 6 of 22 from 3. They, missed 5 free throws. I would argue that this is probably a below-average offensive game from them here. Yeah. But because of how elite they are defensively, they get the job done, relatively easy. This game kind of blew up, 3 quarters to late in the game, and you have to give them credit, though, for battling. It was going to be whoever made some shots would probably pull away. That happened. When it comes to Florida, Mike, they're still 18-3. I still really like where they're at. They host Vanderbilt on Tuesday. If they're able to win that, I still like the Gators and where they're at. They're still a 2 seed, and they're not dropping after losing at Tennessee. They're really good offensively, and if they're able to take care of business against Vanderbilt, I think we can pretty comfortably write this one off as just not their day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, you look earlier on in the season, Florida won by 30 against Tennessee. So there's going to be one of these games where you're going to play a really tough team in the SEC this year, and it's not going to be your day, and you're going to get blown out of the gym. And this was Florida's game that they got blown out of the gym. They're still a really good team. I would not be worried if I am a Florida Gator fan, especially when you look going forward. They've got to play Auburn. But aside from Auburn, I think they actually have one of the easier SEC schedules coming down the stretch. That's not to say that they haven't played a really tough schedule this year. They absolutely have. But I think come Monday, Vanderbilt will likely drop out after their 30-point loss to Oklahoma. They've only got 2 ranked games played in the rest of the month of February. So given 2 really good teams still at Mississippi State, at Auburn, but it's easier than a lot of other teams in the SEC.
You just think if they take care of business against Vandy, it doesn't really matter what happens in those 2 because, again, they have 2 home games in a row, one team on the bubble, one team not in the tournament. Then they go to LSU. You'd think they'd win there. Then the end of the season is tough. At Georgia, home to Texas A&M, at Alabama, home to Ole Miss. If you can take care of business in those games I mentioned before, I think they're okay. And just maybe win like half of your tough games remaining, and they'll be in a really good spot. They are still fun to watch. Elijah Martin, Walter Clayton. I'm not quite worried about them if they can beat Vanderbilt. All right, we got a lot of other games left here in this league. And we're going to go to Rupp Arena. John Calipari's return to Lexington with his band of misfit Razorbacks. And, Mike, they came in ready to play. They punched Kentucky in the face, and they never really fought back. It's the Razorbacks that go into Rupp Arena and win 89-79. First time Arkansas has scored this many points in the SEC, and this may have been surprising, maybe as surprising as the Kansas State win, but you have to be happy for Calipari and his players because not only is it Calipari returning to Rupp Arena, 3 former Kentucky players on his team, 3 of his 4 assistants coached at Kentucky with him at one point, and Tyler Ulis, his graduate assistant, won SEC Player of the Year with the Wildcats. So a lot of homecomings for the Razorbacks, and they shocked just about everybody by winning this game from start to finish.
Yeah, I mean, Arkansas was clearly the better team in this entire game. I will say this game lived up to all the hype and then some. It was a really fun game to watch. You could tell that Coach Cal was a little bit emotional when he walked onto the floor, received some boos and some praise, but this was Arkansas's night. And you looked at how tough the conference season has been for them. They were one of the second win in this game.
Yeah.
But this is a huge one, and this could springboard them the rest of the season. They got to go play Texas and Arkansas or in Alabama this week. But I think this could be a catalyst for them to get back into SEC. I'm not going to say contention, but SEC relevance, and get a decent seed in the NCAA tournament. Just a terrific win. And then you look at the flip side of Kentucky. I once again do not like Kentucky in the tournament because you look at when they can't score a lot of points, they're not going to win games. So I was doing a little research this morning. Kentucky this season is 3-5 when they've scored less than 80 points in a game. 3-5, and 80 points is still a big number, right? Yep. But if you can't score a lot of points in a game for Kentucky, chances are you're probably not going to get the job done. So I think still Mark Pope's done a pretty good job in his first season there. But as of right now, I don't see anything that I would expect Kentucky to make a long run in the tournament. I think their time in March will be shorter than expected.
It just seems like this could easily happen again and again for Kentucky.
Yeah.
I don't think they played terrible, but when the other team is making shots and and dictating the tempo of this game. Arkansas wanted to slow it down. They wanted to limit the number of possessions. I think for the most part they did that. And good defensive teams who can make shots are always a threat for these offensive teams. They are. The makeup is exactly the same. And Arkansas has not been a good offensive team this year. They're still a top 30 defensive team, and they haven't made this many. They reached their average number of threes per game in the first half. They made some shots. Obviously, they did something that they haven't really all year. But this win might just get them back into the tournament conversation. They probably do have to go and win against Texas on the road because Texas is a bubble team. You can drag yourself even closer. But, again, this is what we thought Arkansas could be. And they're not very deep, but we had Nelly Davis making some shots. He struggled, and we had all three former Kentucky Wildcats in double figures. Carter Knox, who was a Kentucky commit. Cal brings him. He has a nice game with 10. And then their 5-star point guard, Mike, who's going to be in the NBA next year, Boogie Fland, who is out for the season, was also a Kentucky commit who Calipari pulled.
Yeah.
So I think we both agreed that when this move happened last year, we thought that Cal would go there and win. And I know it's easy to say after the fact, but it does make sense that this happened, more so than the other one. Kentucky's susceptible to this style. Arkansas makes some shots, Razorbacks win, and Kentucky didn't fire Calipari, but they might have some second thoughts about running him out of town.
Yeah, they certainly ran him out of town pretty good. I also was a little disappointed that Kentucky did that because of how good Calipari was. Look, they had 2 early exits and 1 really bad season in the last few years. So that was not up to par for Kentucky basketball standards, but it was interesting to see the reception that he received when he walked in to Rupp Arena. He had some applause, but he also had some boos from some unappreciated fans. So demanding fan base indeed, and that was a interesting few minutes to watch.
And another note, I don't know if it was during some timeout or halftime, but Kentucky brought out Tubby Smith, a former coach, and celebrated him. And I'm not super familiar on his exit. He's coached a bunch of places and done a fairly good job, but I think the announcers mentioned they're like, hey, that's going to be John Calipari one day. And it really should be. I mean, he dragged Kentucky off the mat.
Tubby Smith was run out of Kentucky after, I think, going to the Sweet 16. It was either round of 32 or Sweet 16. And Kentucky ran him out of town because they thought his performances were unsat, and he was a championship-winning coach at Kentucky. So, yeah, absolutely, Sean. It's going to be the same with Cal in a few years. It's just like Pitino. Pitino got booed off the floor every single year when he'd play in Lexington. Now he's a spokesperson for the university, it seems, even though he coaches at St. John's.
Yeah,
he's always there. He's always wearing blue. So it's kind of funny to see all that transpire. But yeah, he will absolutely be welcome back one day when his coaching days are done at Arkansas.
And he won a national title, and the 2 years before he was coach, they were awful. Like, not quite Louisville bad, but it was that sort of trajectory. So, again, looking back at the Calipari reign, you really do forget how awesome they were early on. 50 NBA draft picks in 15 years. And, you can say, oh, well, we didn't fire Calipari. He took a lesser-paying job at a team in the same conference. There were people happy that he left. They didn't fire him, but they were happy he left.
I think most of Kentucky was grateful that he was fired. I think the only issue is that there weren't a whole lot of great coaches in the pool to move last year. They ended up getting Mark Pope, and it ended up being a good hire. But this was clearly a scale down from Kentucky. I think Coach Cal would even admit that currently. But yeah, wow, what an interesting swing last night was, and happy for Coach Cal in Arkansas that they got the win.
Yeah, and if the Razorbacks make the tournament now, we're solely looking back at this game as the thing that got this started, because nobody really expected Arkansas to win this game, but they get the job done there, and Kentucky has to look at things a little bit and see where they can go from there. All right, one more SEC game here, Mike, as we have gone past the hour mark, but this is where we're going to wrap it up. Missouri, you mentioned them earlier, really over doing their preseason expectations. They go on the road to Starkville here and give it to the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Missouri 88, Mississippi State 61. Caleb Grill, one of the best shooters in the country right now, 6 for 11 for 3 off the bench. And Missouri gets their second huge elite road win. They beat Florida earlier. Now they beat Mississippi State. What a season so far for Dennis Gates and the Tigers.
Yeah, 27-point victory in this one. This game was a bloodbath. It was tight early on in the game, and then around the 4 or 5 minute mark in the first half is when things got out of hand. I think it was a 3-point game with about 4 minutes to go in the first half. But I mean, this game got really ugly for Mississippi State. But kudos to this Missouri squad. I think I saw, before this game, I'd only really seen one of their games. It was bragging rights against Illinois. And in that one, they fought really hard, but I did not expect them to be a top 20 team, especially a team that could go on the road and beat a top 15 team by almost 30 points. So hats off to them. You look at the flip side, you look at Mississippi State, they're actually 4-5 now in the SEC. So I think we start to wonder, did we put Mississippi State a little bit too high? Did we get a little bit too high on them at any point? Because losing by 27 is ugly. Losing by 27 at home is really bad. So they're going to have their chances to get right. They've got Georgia, they've got Florida coming up, but a little bit concerned if I'm a Mississippi State fan.
Yeah, they don't get the job done at Auburn at home. And they played well in the game, but they really had a chance to win, and they don't take advantage of that. And then this happens at home. Yeah, I just think I agree with you, Mike. They might be just like a tier below maybe the Final Four contenders in this league, and that tier might be 7 or 8 teams. But I think they're more so along the lines of the Vanderbilts and the Georgias and the Oklahomas. Like they just maybe, aren't going to compete over a 20-game season with these teams. But Missouri deserves a lot of credit. They have 8 really solid players. They get some production off their bench. They do go to Tennessee next, and then they have Texas A&M, and their schedule doesn't get easier. But this win, I had them as a 7 seed before this win. So they're comfortably off the bubble right now, and they could probably take a little bit of a beating here and still be okay for the tournament. But they did not have a single win in the SEC last year, and they are probably one of the top 8 teams in this league.
Yeah. No, it just keeps showing how impressive this SEC is. Reflecting on the last couple of weeks, this could be the best conference we've seen in a really long time. Certainly rivals a lot of these Big 12 conferences that we've seen over the last 10 years and the Big East in the late 2000s. This is pretty fantastic stuff.
So, Mike, we're going pretty long on time here, so we're going to end it here. If you want to hear about the Big Ten, you can check out the In a Nutshell podcast also on this YouTube. We have a couple of football videos coming out. We've got some more basketball videos here. And before we know it, we'll be doing our conference tournament previews, and then we'll be doing our region previews for the NCAA tournament. Obviously, a lot of games this weekend. We'd love to do more of them, but this is as much time as we have. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode, and we'll see you next time.